Hi, I'm Christian Dunn, Managing Partner at Strategic Institute for Innovation in Government Contracting. I'm sitting down once again with Rick Dunn, founder of Strategic Institute for Contracting. And today we're talking about contracts, but the word contracts. And that word isn't always what it means, is it, Rick?
No, contract in government procurement is a word that's thrown around and widely misunderstood as sort of being the baseline of contracting. Contract is a very broad term. It invokes the concept of freedom of contract, and the world is filled with contracts of different kind. And a very narrow kind of contract is a U.S. government procurement contract. And this baselining the word contract, which is so broad in such a narrow focus, can lead to a lot of misunderstanding. So if we turn to the Federal Acquisition Regulation, which is the governing regulation on government procurement contracts, and we go to Part 2 and look up procurement, we will find that we are directed to the word acquisition. And acquisition is the acquisition by contract with appropriated funds of supplies or services by and for the use of the federal government. And then contract is also defined in the Federal Acquisition Regulation, and it basically says the same thing. It controls the buyer-seller relationship of supplies and services acquired with appropriated funds, and it goes into some more detail. Interesting thing about that is that the statutes that govern the Federal Acquisition Regulation, that are the basis for the Federal Acquisition Regulation, the Armed Services Procurement Act and the Federal Procurement Policy Act, do not define the term contract. They do define the term procurement, basically the way that I just laid out as the definition of acquisition in the Federal Acquisition Regulation. There's another statute called the Federal Grant and Cooperative Agreement Act, which talks about three instruments: assistance instruments, grants and cooperative agreements, and a procurement instrument, the procurement contract. And it specifically uses the term procurement contract, which is the appropriate title for a contract that is executed under Federal Acquisition Regulation. But the use of this term contract alone obscures things such as other transactions are contracts. They are not procurement contracts. They are not subject to the Federal Acquisition Regulation. They transcend that. The Section 2371B can be used to acquire goods and services as a prototype. It can be used for follow-on production of goods and services. There's specific statutory authority for that, but it's not subject to the Federal Acquisition Regulation. 2371 is used for basic applied and advanced research. Well, do you use a procurement contract for that? No. We have an article on the website called Appropriate Contractual Instruments for R&D, and it points out that the appropriate contractual instrument for R&D is not a procurement contract, because R itself says that the purpose of contracted R&D is the acquisition of knowledge, the acquisition and application of knowledge to agency and national goal. So we have a term procurement contract that's widely contracts, which is widely misused when the term procurement contract is necessary, and we miss the idea that other transactions statutes were enacted as remedial statutes that are not limited to the buyer-seller, that transcend the buyer-seller relationship and can be used to structure agreements in ways that support the goal of the project and are not just taking a project and stuffing it into one paradigm of the buyer-seller relationship governed by FAR. So it's an important point, and it's one that's missed by many acquisition professionals and folks who don't understand what other transactions are.
We throw a lot of language around these days, and sometimes we're not always aware of what the meaning is. And thank you, Rick, for helping to clarify this important point that needs to be made. And please visit our website if you need any more information about other transactions and federal innovative contracting mechanisms. at strategicinstitute.org.